Comienzo por felicitar a la feria, a Carlos Urroz, a esta feria Arco en la que se destaca, en fin, siempre el optimismo de afrontar esta nueva feria. Hoy estoy aquí sentado más que como teórico, como crítico, más bien como representando a ámbito cultural del Corte Inglés, que es la entidad que organiza, que promueve este foro de debate. Como saben, Ámbito Cultural lleva organizando desde hace 11 años un conjunto de intervenciones de artistas que están integradas dentro de lo que esta feria llama After Arco. En ese sentido les invito a que, si tienen un rato o pasean por la calle, por el centro de Madrid, visiten On Color, un conjunto de intervenciones que está, ya les digo, en la calle de Preciados, en los escaparates del Corte Inglés, y a las que este año hemos invitado a Rosa Brun, a Misuo Miura, Nico Munuera, Ángeles San José, Jordi Teixidor, nuestro Premio Nacional de Artes Plásticas, y a José María Iturralde. Es un programa de intervenciones que Ámbito Cultural promueve con la colaboración del Ayuntamiento y la Comunidad de Madrid. Desde hace varios años, Ámbito Cultural viene cooperando en estas mesas de Arco. Les recuerdo las tres últimas por no cansarles. En el año 2012 la mesa se tituló Arte Contemporáneo y Patrocinio. Tuvimos a Isabel Godefroy, directora de programación de la Fundación Cartier, a Claudio Castiglioni, director, que es el manager general de TODS, y a Enrique Loewe, presidente de la Fundación Loewe. En 2013, bajo el título del Nuevo Poder de los Coleccionistas, tuvimos a la directora de la Fundación Sam Art Project, Sandra Mulliez. Tuvimos también a la directora del Guild Museum of Contemporary Art de Estambul, Sevda Al-Guiz, y al presidente de la Qatar Foundation y coleccionista, Abdullah bin Ali bin Saud Al-Thani. El año pasado, ¿Para qué sirve el arte en tiempo de crisis?, era el título. Nos acompañaron Elia Cisneros, Solita Misaham, coleccionistas, las dos citadas. Este año Solita ha recibido también un premio en Madrid al coleccionismo. Miguel Ríos, director de la Leal Ríos Foundation, y Samir Sabet Dacre, coleccionista. Este año, 2015, bajo el título de En la intimidad del coleccionista, participan Uli Sig y Dimitris Daskalopoulos. En general, algunos años hago esta introducción señalando que algunos de los trabajos teóricos que hemos abordado tienen que ver con el coleccionismo. En fin, les recuerdo también, por no aburrirles, un texto que publicamos con la Fundación Sistema que se titula De la nada al espectáculo, el mercado del arte en España, y en muchas ocasiones esa vinculación al coleccionista, que me une también a veces a estas mesas, tiene que ver con los encuentros que he tenido con diversos coleccionistas, algunos históricos como puedan ser Fernando Zobel y todo lo sucedido en Cuenca, y mi proximidad a otras colecciones, en fin, algunas bien conocidas como la de Pilar Citoler. Dicho esto, la directora de este foro es Judith Benhamou-Huet, una mujer moderna, inquieta, de escritura intensa, aguda, brillante, una mujer ansiosa de lo contemporáneo, que siempre destaco cuando pienso en estas palabras. A veces me es difícil comprender cómo puede hacer compatible ese vértigo de estar permanentemente en lo contemporáneo con una actitud reflexiva y honda, como es capaz de hacerlo compatible. Ya he contado muchas veces, y ya me ha oído contarlo alguna vez, que nos conocimos a través de Pilar Citoler. Hace unos años ella escribió un artículo que les traduzco, el título era Con Franco el arte tenía el gusto de la libertad, que publicó en 2005, y luego pudimos ver un magnífico libro que publicó, que les aconsejo, que se llama Global Collectors, Collectionneurs du Monde, con un prefacio de Samuel Keller que publicó en 2008. Judith se especializó en arte tras estudiar Derecho y Ciencias Políticas, escribe crítica y artículos relacionados con el mercado del arte, Escribe, ya digo, de modo habitual en Les Echos, en Le Point y en Art Press. Colabora igualmente con numerosas publicaciones internacionales, siendo directora de una edición televisiva de Paris Première y TV5 Monde. Es reconocida, ya digo, como una de las grandes especialistas internacionales en el mercado del arte contemporáneo, dando conferencias en numerosos lugares del mundo. Entre sus publicaciones les destaco Art Business, de edición Assouline en 2007, Les œuvres d'art les plus chères du monde, de edición Dijen en 2010, y otra que les traduzco, que siempre resulta singular el título, y en especial en esta feria, que publicó Grasset en 2012, A los artistas les ha gustado siempre el dinero, de Albrecht Durero a Damien Hirst. De sus últimos blogs les leo 3 títulos, antes de pasarle la palabra, porque esa cualidad que he destacado antes, cómo es capaz de hacer permanentes revisiones de las exposiciones, de las ferias, y conservar la cordura, que no siempre es fácil. De sus últimas críticas, por ejemplo, una que se titulaba Etel Adnan et Akis, 2 artistas de 89 años que hacen arte contemporáneo. En noviembre de 2014, la exposición Jeff Koons en el Centro Pompidou, El escándalo y la historia del arte. Y en octubre, en París, Damien Hirst muestra que es incapaz de renovarse. Esos 3 títulos, que eran casi ya una declaración crítica, nos sirven de introducción para que pase la palabra a Judith Benhamou, que va a dirigir este foro.
Muchas gracias, Alfonso. ¿Puedes oírme? ¿Es bien? ¿Sí? Yeah, but I have to speak in English, I'm sorry. Would you mind taking some translator, perhaps? Well, anyway, si quieren, se pueden tomar cosas para la traducción. Today I'm super proud to have been able to invite 2 very special characters of the art world. They are great because they have a private vision, but they have also a public vision about contemporary art. I'm not going to speak a long time. I want them to speak. I want them to explain what are their aims, and they have a real vision which is quite rare in our world and in the contemporary art world. I met Uli Sieg. I made some research in 2006. Uli is supposed to have the biggest collection in the world of Chinese art, and he began being interested in collecting Chinese art in 90, so long time ago. But not long time ago, he gave the main part of his collection to a museum who is going to open in Hong Kong in 2018. And he will tell you all about his vision about Chinese art, how he built his collection, and how he decided to share his vision about contemporary Chinese art. I met Dimitri very recently. Last October, I went to Greece, I went to Athens, and I was invited to see a performance of Tino Segal. Tino Segal is a very special artist. He's just making performance. He doesn't want anyone to record what he is doing. He's very strict about his vision in contemporary art. And I went to see in a great place in Athens, in the Roman Agora, this performance. I arrived and there was all those ruins, witness of the strong past of the city, and some people were coming to you and asking very private questions and very public question also about what's going on in the world and in Greece and about crisis, etc. And I met the person at the origin of this project, and it's him, Dimitri. Dimitri was able to sustain and to pay for 140 persons to be able to make the performance in Greece for more than 1 month, and it was absolutely great. In the same time, so Dimitri has 2 parts in his activity. He has a foundation, Neon, and at the same time he has a private collection, but he doesn't want to make a museum. He wants to share. Both of those guys have a private vision but want to share contemporary art, and that's fantastic, I think. Very generous in our world. So we will begin with Uli. Uli, I would like you to tell us about the beginning of your adventure in China. You arrived in '79, I think, and you discovered China. You were the first to make a joint venture in China with your company, Swiss company. Tell us.
Okay. I may do this with the help of some images, which make me use this.
Ah, voilà.
And actually, I may go down there because then I don't have to risk my neck speaking to you.
Perfect.
And allows me to gain some distance from our demanding but very kind moderator. When I came to China, it was end of the 70s, 1979, and this happened to be the very first days of the opening up of China, open door policy, and it also happened to be the very first days of contemporary art in China. Could we maybe take off some light? Is that possible?
Yes, less light, can we?
That particular light. So let me begin. This is actually what I found. End of the 70s. This is the socialist Chinese realism. This was program, content, and style at the same time. This is a very famous painting. It shows the whole code of the socialist realism. The idea at that time was art must educate the masses, and paintings have to be in a way to motivate the masses, to tell them fear about the agricultural population, helping to build the new China. The code demands there must be a child, there must be a woman, there must be an elderly person, there must be the army, and they have to show enormous enthusiasm. And this is really what art was about. Now, in '79, this is the very beginning of contemporary art. It was a big rupture. It meant that the artists who previously had to do commissions by the government, who were not allowed to do anything other but this socialist realism, could move on to do autonomous art, choose their subject, choose their style. So what I found at that time was actually a derivative of Western art. The artists had to sort of practice what in our part of the world students were already going through in their education. They had to start with this painting, for instance. This was a painting shown in the very first exhibition of so-called contemporary art in China, and it caused enormous discussions. You know, how could somebody show such figures? They are much too long, these elongated figures. That doesn't exist in nature. That kind of dispute was there at the time. There was a lot of this art, and actually, in hindsight, completely wrong. I didn't collect it at the time. I was looking at the Chinese contemporary art scene with a Western eye, interested in the forefront of Western contemporary art, and I just couldn't find it. That's what I found. So yes, I studied it, but I didn't collect it at the time. Here we make a move, second half of the 80s. By that time, the Chinese artists had found a language of themselves, had found to themselves, had adopted, had assimilated Western art language, Chinese art language. Still, they were contributing to, in their vision, help develop this new China throughout the 80s. comparable to the Soviet realism, Soviet constructivism of the early 20th century. And much of the art, like this painting, for instance, was of that nature. This artist, critical about Mao. This particular work shows Mao as the official portrait demands it. The official portraits, 8 official portraits of Mao were allowed at the time, and this matrix was defining the image so that in the whole nation the Mao images would be the same. And here, of course, the artist puts the frame on top of the artist, on top of Mao, which then indicates to us either we or him are behind bars, etc., etc. So you see, the language becomes not anymore a derivative of Western art, but it becomes highly political. We make another jump into the 90s. That was after 1890 Tiananmen. At that time, the artists were, after a short window of time where they had come out of the underground, pushed again back to the underground. They were very resignated, negative about the perspective of China. And here we see this young, bald-headed, it's actually the artist himself, viewing this old China resurfacing again. And this is the art which made Chinese contemporary art known in the West. It was this particular part, the cynical realism, cynical polit-realism, as it was called, which found a way into our auction rooms, which found a way into our exhibitions, which was mainly chosen by Western curators to represent Chinese contemporary art. This is another example. This is actually the most accomplished Chinese artist in terms of market. Last year, a painting changed hands for $24 million US by him. It shows you where the market had gone in the meantime, starting in the 80s from hundreds of dollars, a few $100s, then towards end of 80s to the $1,000 or $2,000, and then around the year 2000 to the $10,000s of dollars, to the peak in 2008, where paintings would make millions, and artists who had never anticipated such a development became very rich overnight. This shows more of this political pop, which again is the preferred medium of, or preferred language of Western curators, not equally popular in China. Actually, this painting could not be shown in China today. It's Chairman Mao. It's derived from a very famous photo, and that photo showed Chairman Mao visiting the farmers in this era, Shaoshan, and the painter added the that time president, Jiang Zemin, on the left, and Deng Xiaoping, the maker of the new China. And it was the Time magazine who chose this particular painting to be the cover of 1999, 50 years of People's Republic of China. And this shows another type of misunderstanding quite frequent in the West. They felt this is a very positive painting. It shows these laughing people. It shows all the leaders in the painting. They did not realize that it shows President Jiang Zemin on the left with this steaming teacup, actually as the driver of, like in the position of a driver with his tea. And we have the two really important people sit there and chat to each other. And so this particular magazine had been seized and was not allowed to be distributed in China. So that's another facet of Chinese contemporary art when seen in the West. Here, towards the end of the 90s, we come to a period where consumerism has reached the Chinese society, and the artists start to thematize consumerism. A lot of these images may remind us of people like Warhol, etc. Of course, the Chinese artists by that time knew about Warhol, knew about Western art, but it's not to be seen as a copy or anything of our kind of pop art. It's more that the Chinese society had entered that stage which our societies had gone through in the 60s and maybe early 70s. So we see more of that type art. Performance also entered the Chinese art scene. We see here the artist throw this red pigment in the river, representing...
It was Ai Weiwei before, right?
No, this art is called...
No, the Coca-Cola one.
Yes, this one is...
It's important to say it's Ai Weiwei because perhaps today it's one of the most famous Chinese artists, right?
That's true, yeah. He is the best known artist outside China while he's still facing very difficult situation within China. More performance art. Actually, this is the work of a woman. She was the first one to deal with the environment, which today is a huge topic in Chinese society as well as in Chinese art. She collected this water of this local river, froze it, and then had the inhabitants of this village clean their own water while it's melting. Photo also, of course, became a medium of the choice of Chinese artists. Here, the artist selects very old photos, this school class, 73, and then he tries to find the same individuals and puts them in an image 30 years later. And one can not only read the individual life stories maybe of these individuals, but they also represent very much the way the Chinese society has covered in this time. Here is an image about script, calligraphy, where the artist covers his face with calligraphy. We see more such works that deal with calligraphy. We, over the last few years, have seen a turn of the Chinese artists towards their own tradition, something unimaginable in the 80s, when the artists were very much enamored with the Western conceptual art and really disregarded their own tradition. By now, many of these artists have been disillusioned, disappointed by Western concept and have turned back to their own tradition to find new inspiration. Some discovered just a corpse and turned away again. Some discovered a beautiful dream and turned away, and others really found new ideas, new concepts to do more work. Here's another artist. This is another school we find very often in Chinese art. Actually, it's the wife of the artist Ai Weiwei. It's a 40-meter long ribbon, so to speak, where she sat down every day for a full year and started to paint these small squares, black ink squares. So this work represents 1 year of her life. We see a lot of this type of meditative work in China. This is a very strong school which kept throughout the ages and still popular today. This is another work of a situation where the 1,000-year-old tradition meets our Western industrial age, which overpowered China throughout the 80s, 90s, of which I was part of in one way or another. It's 132 Neolithic vases, 5,000 years old, and they are about 1/4 of them covered by white industrial paint, destroyed or painted over, or however we want to consider. It's that very split attitude of the contemporary artists to their tradition. Here's a work about landscape painting. That's the other pillar next to calligraphy of Chinese tradition. And so these topics very much resurface in today's art.
But revisited, right? This is bodies.
Yeah, these are, of course, bodies manipulated in Photoshop, whatever, to represent the Chinese landscape, which again has to follow a certain code. There must be the fog, the emptiness, there must be the imposing mountain, etc., etc. Here's another artist focusing on Ming aesthetics, taking contemporary topics, but putting it in a very different language. This is same artist. It's again a Ming chair. It's like an explosion drawing. So the artists work with all kinds of media, all kinds of ideas, and in that sense they have really reached very much, say, the format, the language as we may find it in here, as we find it in our institutions, Kunsthalle, etc. So these are a few works to look at. Maybe no need to comment everything.
No, but it's nice. It's huge, and it shows a large range of choice that you have done.
So all kinds of objects, all kinds of materials. This is a highly political work. It, according to the artist, shows that power today is exerted by the office, by the bureaucracy, maybe by business people. You see all these torture instruments that is represented in these objects. It's all kinds of guillotines and knives and torture instruments. And so, according to his view, in today's China, it's where the power is exerted, but also where the power is exerted upon. This shows some other issue, very prominent for a while in Chinese art. This is a work made by human fat, a large pillar. It was very much represented in a time which now by law is not allowed anymore, in the early 2000s, where we can see the very different taboos in the Chinese art as compared to our art. There were at the time exhibitions where you could see like a nude corpse of a woman. You would enter a room and you could walk around that corpse, and you would leave, and even censorship had gone through these rooms, but they have a very clear task. They don't know anything about art. They look for living politicians being represented. Maybe they look for intercourse, but they wouldn't, find something like a corpse or human fat, whatever, on that list of censorship. This is another work by a young couple. It's about the old ideas that rule the world, represented by these old people. They do not necessarily represent a certain individual, but they stand for these ideas which very much rule the Western world, and therefore also have a huge impact on the Chinese society. Here's another work. It's called The 10 Mayors on the Grassland. They are actually these individuals in their 50s, a little bit overweight. these are the people that govern China today. Very self-asserted, their expression. So it's a difficult work to show, but this is a work by a female artist executed on Second Life, which though now sort of ends its life, but it just is an indication that they play with all our media, our systems, with the web, etc. I think these were some images just to go through what the collection is and what the history has been over time. Should I now quickly explain what happened to the collection? Is
Yes,
that the
of
moment?
course, but first you have to, could you explain to us the idea that in fact you did not collect in function of your taste, but you wanted to embrace very, very large, to give kind of memory of what was going on in China from the 90s, right?
So when I came to China, again, end of the 70s, to establish what later became the first joint venture company between the outside world, I was trying to see another reality than the one I was allowed to see by the Chinese officials, by the party. I was always observed, accompanied. So I hoped the Chinese contemporary art would give me another inroad to Chinese culture. That's why I started to look deeply into it, but as I mentioned earlier, didn't collect because I didn't find it interesting enough. But then when I reassessed the situation, at that time I was ambassador to China, North Korea and Mongolia. I saw that nobody was collecting Chinese contemporary art, not even in a remotely systematic way. And I thought, this is very odd. This is the biggest cultural space in the world, but nobody paying attention to what the Chinese contemporary artists were doing and how they were contributing to this society which was forming, this contemporary society. So I decided to do what actually a national institution ought to do, to collect and build this document which later would allow to illustrate what Chinese art was, starting late 70s to today.
But you already had the idea to give one day the collection to a museum?
Yeah, when I realized what I just described, I thought, okay, I will build this document since nobody does it, but I one day will give it to China.
Ah.
Yeah, so
you wanted to give back what, in a way?
I felt, when maybe the children in a few years will ask their parents, what did our artists do in the 80s, 90s? It cannot be found in China. So I felt somebody's got to do this. And
but
that
you
was
are
my
Swiss.
motive.
But you are Swiss.
I'm Swiss. That has been also a dispute at times. Can a foreigner do something like that? And I also established an art award, an art critic award in China when the same topic resurfaced. Can I, as a foreigner, sort of judge what's meaningful and not meaningful Chinese art? And these discussions maybe still exist to a degree, but basically the people have understood what the mission is, which I imposed on myself.
Yeah,
and,
being so generous is something weird in a way, right?
It may be weird, yeah. And, and
in a capitalist country, new capitalist communist country.
Yeah. So
what did you decide to do with Hong Kong? Could you explain to us?
So my idea was, as I said, to give it back, but while I collected, rather like an institution would, not like an individual would, not according to my taste, but as you said, according to institutional type process. I knew it would go back, but I didn't know when, I didn't know how, I didn't know where. And by around 2010, 11, big Chinese institutions started to build huge museums or plan huge museums. Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, and other cities. So I felt this is the moment, to make a plan and do the step where to allocate the collection. So I negotiated with Beijing, Shanghai, Minister of Culture, with Hong Kong, and I could see that Hong Kong would provide the best platform for such a collection. In Beijing, in Shanghai, a major reason was that I knew there is censorship. I was prepared to accept censorship to a degree, but I wanted to know what is it, to what degree does it go, what are the rules, but nobody was in a position to fully explain to me censorship.
And it could change.
It could, of course, change overnight. And so I felt that Hong Kong, which at the time was planning this huge museum, bigger than the MoMA in New York, but didn't have a collection, didn't have anything yet in the museum, no content. I felt this could be a very good platform for the collection. Actually, about 45 million mainland Chinese travel to Hong Kong each year. So if you know Hong Kong, after 2 days shopping, there is nothing else to do there. So I think a major institution, a museum of that type they are building, will have a great future, and maybe even more mainland Chinese will see it there than could possibly see it in China.
Bon, merci beaucoup. Dimitri, could you explain your behavior as a collector and as the founder of the foundation in Greece, what you are doing?
Yeah, it's a very usual question that we are called to answer. I mean, how do you become a collector? And I've always felt through the years that I never became a collector. I was somehow born a collector. You have it in you. I think most of you here, if you are in an art fair and you're interested in collection, it's because somehow you found out that you are collectors yourselves. Of course, how far you go depends on your passion and, of course, your wallet. So...
When you say wallet, there's a music. Is it normal?
So when I'm asked when I started collecting, people usually mean my art collection, but I say I bought a little statue in Thailand that I loved at the age of 17, and it didn't fit in my suitcase, and I was carrying it around. So there was something in the DNA about collecting, and I think once you're a collector, it's not only in one thing. You like to put things together and make a statement. So I do that with wine, with photographs, and I've gone through various things in the past. So collecting is a very fulfilling passion. I became serious about contemporary art since the early 90s, and in these 20-some years I have put together a collection of a little more than 500 works of international contemporary art from the period of 1980 and later. And one characteristic of the collection is that it is very small in painting and was never afraid to buy large sculptures, installations. I find that if you collect with having in mind where you put it in your house, you're not really making a collection of contemporary art, you are decorating your home.
And you have nothing at home, right?
Nothing.
Nothing at home. So
Nothing
it's a
from the
very
collection.
radical behavior as a collector.
Yes, and so the collection is in warehouses, in crates, because it is big installations, big things. I visited once the warehouse where I have them, and after going inside the building and seeing all the crates, we walk outside, and the owner there says to me, shows me 2 big containers, and he says, "These are yours too." So it was a work by Christoph Bücher that needs 2 containers, you know, the ones you see on trucks, to be stored. So I said from the beginning, if artists are expressing themselves in this way, I cannot just buy a painting that can fit in my living room. So in that sense, the collection has a lot of big works. The other thing I say about my collection is that I've always had a very specific sensitivity about what I put in the collection and what I leave outside, which I think is very important. You had the feeling at this fair that you see so many things that you like, things that fit more or less with your aesthetics or the other things you have. But if you are going to make a coherent collection, you have to be very strict about what you buy and what you leave outside. And I have, you know, the word collect is a Latin translation of a Greek word, an ancient Greek word, which actually in Greek, collect, is silego in Greek, is I put things to speak together. So the word collection, silogi in Greece, is about a dialogue between things. So that's why I say that's the first criterion, about things that talk to each other and add to the main theme. My main theme, I always said, I was not able to say that. I just felt it for many years, and then I found a text by a Greek writer, Nikos Kazantzakis, and he writes about the luminous interval. The luminous interval being saying we come from an abyss, we end up in an abyss, and in this period between where we are active, where we are living, where we're creating, is the luminous interval. So I'm really fascinated by the human ability to create, to look for progress, to look for happiness, to be optimistic all the time, despite the difficulties, maybe the ugliness inside. And I see that I made my career in business, in the food business, and I was successful only because I was always working with people who were very motivated to do the best, and it's a marvel really what we achieve as humans. So I was trying to find works always that show this struggle, this activity, this success. And of course my collection has a lot of emphasis on the body, but not on the body as we talk on it in contemporary art, but as the body as the carrier of everything that is human, of this vitality.
And so you share your collection. The thing is about, if you don't keep it at home, if it's in storage, you want to lend to museum, etc., right?
I have been lending very freely, and happily I say a lot of museums and exhibition think that a lot of works in my collection are useful to them to put in exhibitions. So at any time I have anything from 25 to 50 works on loan. And I always see I say this and it's not very believable sometimes. I see myself as the caretaker of the creativity of other people. I don't feel I own the work, because a work was made by an artist and it expresses a lot of his soul. If it's a good artwork, it expresses an idea. And if it is a good artwork, it can interrelate, cause thinking in all of us that see it. So an artwork is a living thing. It gets more meaning as it is shown, as it interacts with other works. as it interacts with each one of us. So that's how I see the life of the artwork, not something that I had the ability to buy and keep it for myself. So in that sense, I lend, and in the same vein, I consider my collection a repository available to anybody that wants to use it, and eventually I see it as Uli in public institutions that can continue this showing and this dialogue with other works and with the public. So I have created a foundation because I personally felt the power of art. I think actually art is a basic human need. Inexplainable, but it's a basic human need. It's not a luxury. That's why people create these things. We put them in museums, we go, we visit them, we see them. It's a basic human need. And from my interaction with art, I have had, you know, inspiration, curiosity, creativity in myself. So I said at some point that I want to do whatever I can to expose the Greek public, you know, to the challenges of contemporary art. And I think that's important in my country, especially because we are going still through a big crisis, which we call economic, but at its basis, it's a cultural crisis. We were not thinking right for many years. That's why we got into these troubles. So I think contemporary art has the ability, you know, to confront us with current issues, to make us uncomfortable, to make us think in a new way about ourselves, about the society we live in. So I started a foundation in Athens to do that.
Néon.
Neon. And I said two important things, which is the mantra for this institution. Said, one, this is not about my collection. The activities of the foundation is not about showing the artwork that I already own. It's about going where people are and creating events that can stimulate people. So to make sure that that was believable and strong, I said that is why I am not going to have a building, ever. Not my own museum, not an exhibition space, nothing. There are enough public spaces, private spaces, open spaces in the city that we can go and do activities around contemporary art and around people. I've been doing that for 2 years, I think, with success.
Successfully. Perhaps we can see the movie about
We have
it.
a little video that shows you what we have been doing.
exhibition.
Just I asked them to stop it, it's too detailed. Just to point out two other things except the exhibitions. You saw we have an important axis of helping educational programs, and we're trying to put education around contemporary art in schools, and then helping our public institutions. We have a Museum of Contemporary Art in Athens that has not opened yet, but is close to opening up, so we are supporting those institutions. So I stop here. And,
That's very impressive. So do you want to make us some commentary about some of your work shown in several museums, like in Bilbao, for example? Can we show some of the images?
Yes, I usually say very little about the collection because there are more than 150 artists, and if you try to describe, you leave them out. So what I did here is show you some photographs and catalogs from the three museum exhibitions that were done by about the collection, and that is I think those were my happiest times in collecting, when a museum comes to you and says we know your collection is interesting, would like to exhibit it. It's very nice, it's very flattering, and also it allows you to see how museums and curators look at that. So I've had an exhibition, you see the dates there, in the Whitechapel Gallery in London, and they they have a small space, about the size of this room, where they decided to start showing private collections, and they did a whole year of 4 different iterations of so they picked works and had a different theme in each one of them. That was one single installation. That's a Mona Hatoum work. That was the 3rd. Did I press that? No, huh? Now I did. And
in
now
Bilbao?
We go to Bilbao. We had a totally different exhibition because, you know, Bilbao and Guggenheim is a very large building. They gave us 5,000 square meters, so you could see many of the large installations. This is a Matthew Barney piece that I co-own with the Guggenheim Museum.
They came to see you to ask your collection?
Yes, they worked 4 years on the idea.
Ah.
And this is a large installation by Thomas Hirschhorn. It's a whole cave that you walk through. It's called Caveman Man. This is a projection work by Paul Chan. And this is a huge installation by Jon Bock. There's a pink Cadillac behind there. that all these come out of. So you see in Bilbao it was a different installation, big pieces. And then we had the third exhibition in Edinburgh, in the Scottish National Gallery, called From Death to Death and Other Small Tales. And what they did there is they put my collection in dialogue with their collection of surrealist and early 20th century art. So it was a fantastic dialogue in small rooms with 2-3 works in each room. This is one of my installations by Ernesto Neto. This is a Helen Chadwick work called Piss Flowers. This is a room with one of the conversations. This is Kiki Smith works, and on the other wall was a Max Ernst painting owned by them. And here is one of the most successful dialogues. The piece in the front is a Jean Arp piece owned by the Scottish National Gallery. On the wall behind is 2 Robert Gober basinless sink and a fountain by Duchamp. So you get an idea of what the collection is about.
And you began with Duchamp? Why did you have the Duchamp?
No, Duchamp came, I think, 8 years into my collecting activity. And it was very important for me because very expensive piece on auction, very famous. And I was already had a serious collection. I was right at the point of saying, maybe I've had enough of creating a serious collection. Maybe I should stop here. But if I go ahead, I put the fountain in, and that gives me 20 more years because that work is at the basis, of contemporary art, and it can have dialogues with anything else, but it has to make you very strict about what you put in dialogue with it and around it. So I decided to buy that piece, and I've never stopped collecting since.
So, but what's your relation with collection? Because you don't see the work, right? You just imagine them, in a way?
Yes, I remember all the rooms that where my collection was exposed. I go through my database at times, but you also see I've become very active in with all the ideas I have from being in the art world about doing this activity with the Neon Foundation, which gives me great pleasure.
And you, Uli, giving all those work, such an amount of work, you still think about them like being yours in a way?
I gave, actually together with Rita, my wife, who's back there, we gave 1,500 pieces to the Hong Kong Museum, and we keep some 700 pieces. And since I had taken this decision long time ago to depart with the work one day, it wasn't so difficult for me as it is for her in some instances. And there's still enough art to be surrounded by it. But unlike Dimitris, I live within my art.
Yes, because both of you, most of the people who are buying here want to possess, really. You want to have, but in the same time you really want to share. This is very special with the title of our dialogue today. Your relation, your intimacy to art is something very special. You need to share in a way, right?
I did explain that art only has a meaning if it is shared, if it is discussed, if it creates feelings. It's really selfish to say, I have this art. Of course, you need to decorate your house. You like to have nice things around you. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you become a collector, who suddenly needs a warehouse, then you have to start thinking about how you share.
I think we had a large point of view about all you are doing, and that's super impressive, I think, and very generous. It's very rare. Is there any question in the public? Voila. One. Can we give a microphone?
Thank you. This question is for Uli Slick. It's a question about art and forecasting trends. As you explained, the collection you mounted says something else besides just art. There's a connection in terms of interpreting the political and social standing, and the arts, besides just doing art, they also are good sociologists in terms of what is coming. From your sense of Chinese art today, what do you think they're trying to project in terms of what is coming?
You are right. For me, the collecting was very much about this other access to the Chinese reality. And we saw in the 80s and 90s the art of the Chinese artists being very political. But then the government, bureaucracy, started to treat the art scene with more souplesse, and they became more flexible. Artists could move out of the underground after the year 2000, could actually become heroes in People magazines and coffee table magazines. So there was a very different attitude all of a sudden towards art. And that put particularly the older generation artists in a difficult position, because they have been used to produce their art against something, to have a friction against a repressive system. And when the system became more subtle, more flexible, they had lost their enemy and they had to find new topics. Now, amongst the young artists, there's very little political and activist art. It's more about the self, it's more about maybe individuality, gender, all these topics our artists deal with. So there has been a considerable shift, but you still have this hardcore, like led by Ai Weiwei, of real activists, and the Chinese society, all its tension, provides ample ground for political art, and there will be political art in the future.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your vision about. Thank you very much for sharing your vision about collecting. I have a question for both of you. It's about the impact or influence you got from other collectionists in their vision, because comparing your two visions, they are different. The way you collect or the reason by which you collect. I'm interested in the possible influence you got from other collectionists in about their vision.
Well, we were having lunch before, and Uli said about himself that he is considered an eccentric individual. I think I will not put it that harshly, but we are all very particular. So to develop passion, you have your own vision. If you are going to translate it into a collection, you take your own path. You always look and maybe get inspired by other people, but it's never, I think for a collector it's so personal, it comes from the inside, and everybody is different than anybody else. So there's, I think, very little influence from other collectors.
In my case, I had decided to put my own taste in the background and to collect like an institution would. So I don't see any collector as an individual who had impact on me. I was more reflecting how would an institution go about this huge scene, and how would a collection mirror the art production of the Chinese contemporary artists along the timeline from the late 70s to today and across all media. And that is how I try to put together the collection.
Thank you. Another question? Thank you.
Hola, buenas tardes. Yo quería felicitar a estos dos grandes coleccionistas.
No podemos oír.
Ah, Judith, grito más. Quiero felicitar a estos dos grandes coleccionistas y a ti personalmente, porque creo que has hecho una elección muy... Es que hay una bulla afuera tremenda. Y te quería felicitar a ti porque creo que has hecho una elección pues muy inteligente, eligiendo dos coleccionistas muy distintos, como decía antes alguien por allí, pero que por otra parte se complementan y se unen en muchas facetas. Sobre todo lo que veo es una gran libertad en hacer su colección, que nunca han tenido miedo. Hay que ver cómo Uli empieza a comprar arte chino cuando nadie compraba arte chino, pero él se decide por una intuición, por una quizás favorecido por influencias de sus viajes y de su cosmopolitismo, y entra en este coleccionismo tan especial. Dimitri hace otro tipo de coleccionismo, pero también muy valiente, muy decidido y con grandes riesgos personales. Y estoy de acuerdo, Dimitri, en que el coleccionismo nace de dentro. Luego hay una serie de influencias culturales, sociológicas o personales de carácter que te hace que seas realmente coleccionista, que sigas en ello, pero sí es como un fuego que llevas dentro y que no cesa. Enhorabuena a los dos porque habéis hecho dos grandes colecciones, que además con ese punto de vocación hacia lo público.
Muchas gracias. Como he dicho antes, son dos personas absolutamente únicas. Hay muchos otros coleccionistas que no son grandes en sus ambiciones y en su visión como ellos, sin duda. Bon, merci beaucoup. Muchas gracias a todos y a los dos, sobre todo, de haber viajado hasta aquí. Micro.
Nada más darle las gracias por su presencia, darle las gracias a Judith y por esta presentación de estos dos coleccionistas, que yo acabo pensando que hoy tenemos con nosotros a dos coleccionistas éticos. Estaba pensando cuando estaba escuchándoles a los dos, cada uno con su singularidad, como ha dicho antes Pilar, pero me asombraba la ruptura de ese mito del coleccionismo como apropiador de la obra de arte en la soledad de la casa, en el encierro, en el secreto, y me ha gustado mucho esa casi moralidad de lo público como defensa de la forma diferente de ejercer el coleccionismo por las dos partes. Muchas gracias a los tres.
Muchas gracias.